Chingford Methodist Church, everyone's been talking about it for the last year. There's been a lot of controversy about it, but let's just look back now at the history of the church. We're going to look at early Methodism in Chingford, the first chapel on Station Road, the new church that we see today, groups and activities, those things that were taking place in the church. Later additions to the church, personal memories will be, we've got a couple of films about people's personal memories of the church itself, its closure, and what we expect to be happening next. So, the Reverend John Wesley was the leader of the revival movement known as Methodism. He is estimated to have travelled 250,000 miles in 50 years. How he did that, I don't know, to preach the gospel. He started his work in London in 1739 in an old cannon factory, but he built a new London chapel in 1778, adding a house on the site for his visiting preachers and another for himself. City Road became his winter base. He died there in March 1791 and was buried behind the chapel, and you can still see that chapel there today. Although there is no record that John Wesley ever visited the small hamlets of Chingford by the late 1700s, it was noted that only a few dissidents in the parish were dissenters were 2 or 3 Methodists. Unfortunately, who they were and where they lived has been long forgotten. But as there were only 60 houses and a total of population of 200 to 300 people, they must have been well known to their contemporaries. So this poster is evidence of Methodism being practiced in Chingford Hatch in 1832, as you can see there, in a commodious tent for the anniversary of the Wesleyan Chapel. Nothing has ever been discovered about the chapel at that time, because the chapel in Chingford Hatch didn't in fact get built until 1862. So there must have been an earlier chapel to have celebrated this poster. By the end of the 19th century, there was a growing group of active Methodists in Chingford. A large house in Station Road, owned by James Richards, with land at the rear, attracted the attention of a group of active Methodists when it was offered for sale in 1898. The house, known as the White House, was built on a plot some 670 feet by 100 feet and extended back from Station Road to the railway. Supported by Reverend George Denton, as you can see, he was responsible for supporting the building of a number of churches at the time, and the trustees of the Clapton Methodist Church circuit. The house was bought by Walter Rowe and Joshua Gunton on their behalf. Gunton was well known in Chingford for being the owner of Sunnyside, a large house just off King's Head Hill, and in fact we can still see the lodge there now. He was also a partner in a firm called Gunton & Gunton, who were a firm of architects who designed many Methodist churches around the country. Oops, hold on. Yeah. So this is the map of Chingford in 1866. Very few houses at that time, but I'm going to point out to you where the White House was. That's the piece of land now that stretches all the way from the High Street down towards what will be the train station. You've got Maddox Lane, which then changes to Station Road, and of course there is the green. So that gives you some context as to whereabouts that sat at that time. It was proposed to build a temporary accommodation, leaving space for a permanent church in the future. The plans were approved by the council in 1905 and construction commenced by Mr. McManus. The new church was made of iron and often referred to as the Tin Tabernacle, and was opened on the 20th of September 1905 and became known as the Wesley Hall. This was a postcard that I managed to find. It comprises of one main hall, used both for church services and for social activities, with a vestry and offices. The first minister was Reverend W. Kingscott, Greenland. The church cost, including furnishings, just some £515 £1,000, and the room would provide seating for between 150 and 200 people. The temporary building lasted 64 years and became an integral part of the subsequent development until its demolition in 1969. And just to note how long the path is from the Station Road to the Tin Tabernacle, you can see that there, and also on this map here. See that? So there's the first church being built there, having been built with the long path from Station Road. But there was one final obstacle that remained. As it was a temporary building, there had to be a signed agreement with the Chingford Urban District Council that the building would be removed if required by the council. For some reason, this proved to be a stumbling block, and for several months, correspondence passed between the Methodist stewards and the council about the agreement until on the 20th of February 1906, the council used the iron fist and resolved that notice be served on the trustees that unless the agreement is completed and delivered to the council within 7 days, an application would be made for a summons to compel the removal of the building. Apparently, the threat was effective because the building survived and no more was heard of the council's demolition. There you go. So in 1917, the church was declared free of debt after its initial build. The church was served by a number of ministers until 1922. The Reverend George Adcock was appointed, and it was during his tenure that he felt that the church needed a larger space. A building fund was established in 1925, and architects George Baines and Son were commissioned to prepare plans. In November 26, and with a membership which has now doubled to between 70, from 70 to 140, contracts were entered into for building the present church with specially designed curved oak seating, central heating, and an electric-driven organ. And this is an artist's impression of what the church would look like after it had been built. Foundation stones were laid on the 19th of February 1927, and the formal opening took place on the 29th of September that year, when the doors were unlocked by Lady Lowry of Loughton, whose husband, Sir Joseph Lowry, who you can see in the picture, was one of the first contributors to the building fund. The cost of the new church, £9,000, and at the opening, £6,530 had already been raised. And had the land not already been in the hands of the trustees as a result of the foresight of the 1904 stewards, the costs would have been very much higher. During the following year, the membership had risen to 190, and the 3 special efforts had been raised over £800 towards the reduction of the debt. And this is the foundation stone. Very difficult to see it now, but that's what it says there. All to the glory of God, laid by Sir Joseph Lowry, KBE of Loughton, February the 19th, 1927. Builders, Chas S. Foster and Sons. So, we've got here the interior showing the curved oak seating, showing the central heating, which in fact were pipes along the side, bottom of the church, and the electric-driven organ right in front of you. Later buildings included the Epworth Room, opened by Reverend Donald Soper in 1948. Regrettably, because of health concerns which were not evident at the time, the Epworth Room had to be demolished in 1999 because of asbestos in some of the materials. And this, in fact, is an application to build for the Epworth Room. This dates from 1947. And it says on there, a room to be built 36 feet by 24, so we know how big the Epworth Room was. And it also says, sited behind existing church on ground not required for permanent building extension, temporary structure. There we are. So this is a shot of the church from the 1960s. Less than 10 years later, The space between the back of the church and the Wesley Hall was built over to form what is now known as the New Hall. This was opened on the 22nd of November 1958, so gradually the whole complex was being expanded to take into account more services and more activities that are taking place in the church. Then finally in 1969, the old Wesley Hall, the tin tabernacle that we spoke about earlier, which had served the church so well in a so-called temporary capacity for 64 years, was demolished, to be replaced by the present Wesley Hall and ancillary buildings, which were opened on the 12th of September 1970. Money raised for the new hall came from the proceeds of selling off the land that was occupied by the pavilion and tennis courts towards the railway, which we'll come on to very shortly. And this now gives you an idea as to how the church looked in 1974. So there we can see that Station Road. You've also got the main sanctuary, the main part of the church there. There you have the new hall, which really sat between the new church and the old Wesley Chapel, which was the tabernacle. The tabernacle sat there, which is now the new Wesley Hall. And up there was the Epworth room, which was demolished in 1999. And the new room down here at the bottom is the Aldergate room, which comprised of two rooms, which were then chopped into one. So that gives you an idea of perspective, and that's how the church more or less looks today. So the church hosted many groups over the years, including uniformed organisations such as Brownies, which started in 1929, and later the Girl Guides. The 6th Chingford was founded in the early 1960s, and for a time comprised of Venture Scouts, Scouts, Cubs, Beavers and Brownies. The Sunday school started in the first year of the church. As an extension to Sunday school, youth groups, which flourished under different names, were also formed. Musical extravaganzas were produced partly to raise funds to finance an annual old folks party. This gave the young people a practical opportunity of learning what service in the community really meant. Good old days, eh? And this is an example of some of the things that went on in the church through the years. Lots of activities on different days, but my favourite one is Friday evening, 8:30, coffee bar. I wonder if they made cappuccinos, my favourite. Okay, so when the present church was built, a choir was formed under the direction of P.G. Hummerstone, and this soon achieved honours in the inter-choir competitions, and with 40 members, it proved an asset in leading the singing in the Sunday services, and that's the group there. We mentioned about tennis. A tennis club was formed using the land between the church and the railway for a pavilion and tennis courts. It played an important part in the social life of the church from the 1930s up to the 1950s. And in fact, we can see now, that's where the church is. That's the pavilion. And they are the tennis courts. Quite extensive. And I do know a number of people that still remember going to tennis lessons at the Methodist Church. Okay, moving on. So, a lovely church of the interior of the sanctuary here, and I'm going to show you where the choir pews used to be, because the reason why I'm showing you that is simply because they're no longer there, and we'll come on to show you why in a moment. So, I'm going to show you a little film now. This film will give you a little tour of the Methodist Church by the congregation that were there towards the end. Sit back and enjoy this, and you'll start to understand what the Methodist Church is all about.
My name's Gordon Loomer. I've been the property steward at this North Chingford Methodist Church since about 2000, and I was asked to be the property steward because I have a building an architectural background. The minister at the time was Elizabeth Rundle, and she asked me to come up with a way of complying with the Disability Acts at the time, which required a ramped entrance to the church. Originally, the steps you see here were straight up against the doors with a small landing, and as you see this was built about 2001, and that provided the in accordance with the codes of practice and the building regs what was required for disabled access. The design of this church, I don't know who the architectural firm, but it was a pretty standard design for Methodist churches at the time. There's a similar one in the Drive at Ilford. I think there's one at Seven Kings, and they're dotted around. But we've still got our original curved pews. And the other thing to notice is that the ground level, the floor level, ramps down, giving access as you go back. The pews are higher up, giving access to the front all the time rather than the back of somebody else's head. The big problem here was the pews continued all the way through and gave very little space for the communion service, and every minister I met complained and complained, and some wanted to take all the pews out, revamp it, and that's what some of the churches did. The one at the Drive in Ilford have done that. So we're one of the few possibly that have retained our original curved oak pews. They also wanted to take the pulpit out to create more space, because the current fashion for preaching is to be down amongst your congregation, either with these lecterns or even standing here. So this was very controversial. The older members did not want to lose the pews, did not want to lose the pulpit. So I came up with a compromise, and the compromise was from here to bring it out, slot a piece in here with these stairs. These stairs were not here. This was all back here. And you can see the cut and the cut here. So this widened the whole communion area by this amount, solving both problems. We kept the pulpit and we created the space for the communion service and any other form of preaching that people wanted.
There's a couple of stories that I know about that are going round about the organ, but the one I know was that it was built in Leighton for the church by R. Spurden and Rat Company, and there is a website about it, and it says the different churches that have got the organs in. This is the Aldersgate room, and probably in the 70s there were two small rooms, and they were knocked into one to make a multi-purpose room for services and meetings, and a little bit more comfortable than the old halls.
They refer to this as the new hall, yes, because originally the church building finished probably over there, yeah, so this was open ground.
And this was put on in the 50s, I think.
And so this was open ground until you got to here, which was the Wesley Hall.
No, the Wesley Hall was further back.
But this is still called the Wesley Hall.
Yeah, but there was the old Wesley Hall, which is a tin tabernacle, and when it was pulled down, this was known as the Wesley Hall. So there were two Wesley Halls, in fact. The original church, which was a tin tabernacle, and when that was demolished, this was built, and it was renamed the Wesley Hall in memory of the old Wesley Hall.
So was this new hall built at the same time as that?
No, this was built in the 50s, that was built in the 60s.
What?
Yeah, I can remember it being built.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I wondered.
This was built in the late 60s. This hall is known as the Wesley Hall, and it was built in the late 60s with money raised from selling off the ground that led to the railways.
Where the tennis courts were.
And the guide hut.
Yeah, and the scout hut later was knocked down. There are lots of theatrical productions from various amateur drama groups and groups within the church. The present day it's used by the Buxton Bears preschool mainly for 5 days a week.
Blue room and orange room.
Youth room, and that was called the youth room, and that was called the yellow room.
Yeah.
Orange room.
Orange room.
I don't know why, other than at one time it must have had an orange coloured wall. This was a concrete base to a large wooden building that had asbestos cement lining and an asbestos cement roof. It got to a certain stage of disrepair. The Beavers Scout group used to use it, but it got to a certain stage where the decision was made to demolish it, remove it, which cost quite a lot of money because it was an asbestos specialist asbestos company. So at the end there was a concrete base here, still with some vinyl tiles, and the preschool were using it as a playground area. And then after a while they got a council grant to put this rubber safety surface on and build this canopy, and they built that themselves.
No idea what it is. I would imagine it's part of the original attached to the Tin Tabernacle. But I've got no, I know it's known as a fortress, whether the Scouts used it, but I've never known what it is. To those people who've enjoyed watching this film, I'd like to thank you for enjoying it, and I'm sure many of you watching it will have memories of the various events that have gone on at the church, whether it be a bazaar or jumble sale or our famous Christmas festival. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Just a reminder, that was done in 2003, okay, 2023, 2 years ago. Let's just move on then. So the church celebrated its 80th anniversary back in 1985. On this occasion, it was attended by the TUC leader, Lord Murray. Do you all remember Lord Murray? Yeah. And of course, the mayor and mayoress of Walthamstow. And on the right there is the Reverend Eric Murray. And this particular brochure was the last brochure produced, the service sheet, if you like, from 2023, and the last service that took place at the church on the 20th of August 2023. And so the question is now, what's going to happen next? Well, the church over the last couple of years have been looking at what to do with the building. They've had interests from various parties, but at this moment in time, they're looking out to the community for people to come forward with expressions of interest. Expressions of interest in terms of how it should be run as a community space. And they're looking for people to come in and perhaps put a proposal together to run it. A group called We3, which I think are now known as E4 Social, have put together a very comprehensive proposal based around community space and for organisations and partners. They were instrumental in opening the church at the Village Festival, which was fantastic, and a very active group based in North Chingford. I've seen their proposal, the first draft, and it looks very, very good. We're just waiting now to see how that stands up with any other proposals that come in. And I think the proposal process starts in August, so we should start to hear sometime after that. Chingford Historical Society, we're very much interested in being a part of that, because I can see the premises being used for all kinds of events that we could hold there. So all we can do really is keep you informed of that. This was the little board that they put up, E4 Social, about all the kinds of things that could go on within the church. Events, youth activities, talks, shows, live music, cinema night, workshops, arts and crafts, a warm space in the winter, garden club, because there's a garden at the back as you saw, a nursery, cafe, and also a support network for those in the community that need it. And I think, you know, we have to be patient, but I'm hoping, and I'm quite optimistic that something good will come of this. Let's just go back to the last parishioners now, final word from them, the congregation who worship there until its closing in August 23. And here we go.
The first minister I remember was Reverend Goldsack. I came to this church when I was about 7. They used to have an afternoon Sunday school, and then when they switched it to a morning Sunday school, I joined. It was called the Young Church there, and I still remember my first day at the Young Church, because went out the back and someone said, you need to come here, and I went into the old Aldersgate, what was the Epworth room, and they handed me a tambourine. And I thought I was in 7th heaven. I don't think I'd ever been given a tambourine at school or anything, because only select children got the tambourines. And when I was given this tambourine, I just couldn't believe it. And I stayed in the church ever since. I remember lots of ministers. I remember Reverend Dyer, because his 2 twin daughters were a similar age to me. And then after the Dyer, then I remember Elizabeth Randall very, very well. She was a really nice person, and she conducted my father's funeral. But I would say more than anything about this church is I remember the fun we had. Yes, we had the serious side of it, but we just had such fun as a congregation. And
just to mention, there was the Reverend Murray, I think, who followed the Dyers and his wife, who were very active within the church and took part in all the social occasions and so on. And the Reverend Walker, actually it was the Reverend Walker who followed the Dyers and his wife, because his wife became president of Young Wives. Then Eric Murray and Margaret, and after that the names are
Sue Featherstone.
I was going to mention Sue Featherstone.
Michael Sawyer.
Michael Sawyer. Patrick, somebody who wasn't
Patrick
here.
Bryan, he was actually Bryan. He was only here for a year.
Yes, I know.
Everybody mentioned him.
There's a whole stream. You can see the stream of ministers with the stream of people who are attached to them through the church.
Okay. I'm Judy Isles, and I've been a member of this church since 1973, when I first moved to Chingford. I first must have appeared in this church for evening service, as that was convenient to my husband and I at that time. Anyway, I couldn't get over the beauty of it, and I just wanted to get a word in about the splendid building and the way it's been decorated over the years. We've talked a lot about the alterations, and that's been marvellous, but I just wanted to say it is a very beautiful place. And repeatedly, people come into the church when we opened it on a Saturday morning when Brian sold bric-a-brac outside. Sometimes they came because they were married in this church, and it brought back memories. Sometimes it was a relative, but so many of them came, and they really appreciated its continuing beauty.
I was christened in this church, which would have been the very end or early 42, 43. Good. The lectern attached to the pulpit could be raised or lowered by turning a screw quite low down, a small screw. And he commented that on one Sunday there was 2 preachers, one for the morning service, one for the evening service. One was a local preacher, Joyce Pippe, a minister of another man, the wife of another minister in this circuit. And the other one was Peter Featherstone. Joyce was like my mother, very short. Peter was taller than my father. So for one service, my father had to turn the lectern all the way, then he had to bring it all the way up, or the other way round for the next service. And he passed a few comments about it. He was exhausted at the end of it.
The Wesley Hall was built when they knocked the tin tabernacle down, and they sold the land off, and they were able to put the Wesley Hall in. And it was a Wesley Hall with the stage and 2 classrooms and a fully boarded loft. And that the money for that came from selling off the land with the Guy Tatton and the tennis clubs. And that's funded the building of the Wesley Hall.
There was 2. There was the Wesley Hall and there was the Epworth Hall. And they were actually made of timber. And I know that very well because when they were demolished, I was looking for some timber to build a shed in my garden. And you will never guess where I got that timber from. When the timber huts were there before they were demolished, there was a bushed area that had a pathway going through, leading down to the tennis courts. And it was the land up to round about where the timbered Wesley Hall was, and the tennis courts and everything. That was sold, and the money raised to rebuild at the back here. And that would have been round about 1967, 68.
Yes, I remember it, but yes.
Yes.
On a positive note, I think it unlikely that we will lose the love and the care that we have gained through fellowship of this church. We will always care about our fellows within the church, but also we will be able to take that love to other places of worship and try to give the same fellowship to those places that we each choose to go to.
And so there you are. That's from some of the congregation, the last congregation of the church back in 23. So I'd like to thank those people that you saw in the film. Thank you for their cooperation. Thanks also to David Bishop, who's currently looking after the church from the Methodist circuit. Also to Sam and Helen of E4 Social for really getting that church alive again, and for the support, of course, of the congregation of the North Chingford Methodist Church. So that's it for the talk. Any questions you've got out there? Here's one. Hold on. It's a statement.
Well, Sam thinks that she may be able to get services back in their Methodist church.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions? No more questions? Oh, we have. Why did it shut? Okay, so the general feeling is 2 reasons really. The first, a dwindling congregation, and I also feel, and I think David Bishop might back me up on this, they've got a shrinking ministers within the Methodist Church, like most churches now. So I think they had one minister serving 2 or 3 churches, and that started to become a little untenable. But I think the main reason really was because of a falling congregation. Does anyone else know any other reason for that? Have we got some people here tonight from Methodist Church? Someone here?
I don't know the reason why,
Right. Hold on, please. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, after that lovely film,
Thank you.
if anybody knew what was happening with the proposal regarding the homeless hub at the back and the homeless accommodation. Does that mean that the E4 Social is taking it over and it no longer is going to be a viable option?
So I think the simple answer to that is I believe that the homeless shelter at the back will also be putting an expression of interest in, and it's going to be down to the church to decide which way they go on this. There's a lot of feeling. I think the church have now listened to the public, have listened to the community, and I think they've got a hard decision to make really. So I can't really answer that question. It's all in abeyance at the moment. Any more questions? One moment, sir.
Is Michael's shed still standing?
Is what?
Is Michael's shed still standing?
Oh, do you know what? I think that... Oh, is he here? Michael? Where? Oh, here he is. I didn't realise. Michael, it's great to see you. Thank you for appearing on my film. The question is your shed still standing?
That I don't know because I've moved. But
That's the...
that I was so proud of it, I must have done an expert job on it.
Oh, it's the property secretary. Can we have our wood back?
Oh, it's so nice to see so many people here from the Methodist Church. It really is. I hope my film did you proud.
Do you know why they pulled the wall down? It was in the front of the church. Oh, so you just pulled it down.
The wall
Did you
was
not have
falling
to
down.
get permission?
Not for that, no. We have planning issues to build around.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just saying they're having a lot of issues with building the ramp, which is why they had to pull down the.
Just tell another
Yeah, one moment. Yeah. Take that. Another story.
the adaptations for the ramp and the disability modifications. The main one that wasn't mentioned on there was originally when you entered the front entrance doors, there were two draft lobbies. So in front of you was a wall, and then there were two draft lobbies, 4 sets of doors. And when we had a funeral, the funeral directors would have to tip the coffins up to get
Really?
them out. But I mean, that's
Tip
not
the
why we
coffin?
changed it. We knocked the wall down and we used the 4 doors to form a screen.
There you are.
So that was an...
I'm sure there are many, many more stories like that. But, okay, any more questions? Any more for any more? Okay, we're almost, I've got just one last one over here, and we'll finish. There you are.
I just wondered what they built on the tennis courts at the back.
So I believe that's housing, am I right? Housing. And what's the name of that road where the houses are? Do we know? Is it the continuation of Richmond Road? It is, yeah, as I thought. Okay, thank you very much for your time on this.